Honorable committee members, I see a quorum.
For the committee can only receive motions for the election of the chair. The clerk cannot receive other types of motions, cannot entertain points of order, nor participate in debate. We can now proceed to the election of the chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 106.2, the chair must be a member of the government party. I'm ready to receive motions for the chair.
I'd like to move a motion to nominate Honorable Jim Carr for chair. My Winnipeg colleague.
It has been moved by Ms. Dancho that Mr. Carr be elected as chair of the committee. Are there any further motions? It has been moved by Ms. Dancho that Mr. Carr be elected as chair of the committee. I declare the motion carried. And Mr. Carr duly elected chair of the committee.
Thank you, everybody, for the trust you have reposed in me, and to know that it's my ambition to be fair. I don't and never have appreciated hyperpartisanship in politics. And maybe more important than anything else, I hope to be efficient. So let's be efficient together with a spirit of camaraderie. If the committee is in agreement, I invite the clerk to proceed with the election of the vice chairs.
Pursuant to Standing Order 106.2, the first vice chair must be a member of the official opposition. I am now prepared to receive motions for the first vice chair.
Sir.
I nominate my colleague Raquel Dancho for vice chair.
Okay. We have nomination for vice chair.
Are there any motions? Any further motions? It has been moved by Mr. Lloyd, chair of the committee. I declare the motion carried. And Ms. Dancho, duly elected first vice chair of the committee.
You know, of course, that means the Bombers are winning the Grey Cup this weekend.
Conformément à l'article 106.
In accordance with 106.2, the second vice chair is must be a member of the opposition party other than the official opposition. I am now prepared to receive motions for the second vice chair. Inaudible for the interpreter. Good evening. I would like to move Madame Michaud as the second vice chair. It has been moved by Mr. Zuberi that Madame Michaud be elected as second vice chair of the committee. Are there any further motions? It has been moved by Mr. Zuberi that Ms. Michaud be elected as second vice chair of the committee. I declare the motion carried, and Madame Michaud duly elected second vice chair of the committee.
Welcome to meeting number 1 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, and so you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Today's meeting is also taking place in the webinar format. Webinars are for public committee meetings and are available only to members, their staff, and witnesses. Members enter immediately as active participants. All functionalities for active participants remain the same. Staff will be non-active participants and can therefore only view the meeting in gallery view. I would like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not prohibited. Given the ongoing pandemic situation and in light of the recommendations from health authorities, as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on October 19, 2021, to remain healthy and safe, all those attending the meeting in person are to maintain 2-meter physical distancing, must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room, and it is highly recommended that the mask be worn at all times, including when seated. Must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the provided hand sanitizer at the room entrance. As the chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting, and I thank members in advance for their cooperation. To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. 1, members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. If interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately, and we will ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming the proceedings. The raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen can be used at any time if you wish to speak or alert the clerk. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the Board of Internal Economy's guidelines for mask use and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Members, do you wish to adopt routine motions? Yes? If so, the floor is now open to debate, and I will recognize a member to speak. Yes? Mr. McKinnon, you raised your hand. Then it's my pleasure to recognize you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. And it's delightful to be back in physical meeting room again with everyone. Good to see you all. I would like to move a number of routine motions. First one, regarding analyst services. I move that the committee retain as needed and at the discretion of the chair the services of one or more analysts from the Library of Parliament to assist it in its work.
Agreement on that suggestion? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. I would now invite the analysts to come and take their seat. Welcome. Congratulations.
Just to let you know, I'm very happy. I have 2 other colleagues that will be assisting the committee.
Okay.
Looking forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. McKinnon, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Second motion Is on Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure. I move that the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure be established and be composed of 5 members, the chair, 1 member from each recognized party, and that the subcommittee work in a spirit of collaboration.
Good idea to me. Do we have agreement? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Please proceed.
Meeting without quorum. I move that the chair be authorized to hold meetings to receive evidence and to have that evidence published when a quorum is not present, providing that at least 4 members are present, including 2 members of the opposition parties and 2 members of the government party. But when traveling outside the parliamentary precinct, that the meeting begin after 15 minutes, regardless of members present.
Shall we go through all of them and then have one vote at the end? Is that acceptable? Okay, please proceed.
Fair enough. Time for opening remarks and questioning of witnesses. I move that witnesses be given 5 minutes for their opening statement, that whenever possible, witnesses provide the committee with their opening statement 72 hours in advance, that at the discretion of the chair, during the questioning of witnesses, there be allocated 6 minutes for the first questioner of each party, as follows for the first round. Conservative Party, Liberal Party, Bloc Québécois, New Democratic Party. For the second and subsequent rounds, the order and time for questioning be as follows. Conservative Party, 5 minutes. Liberal Party, 5 minutes. Bloc Québécois, 2.5 minutes. New Democratic Party, 2.5 minutes. Conservative Party, 5 minutes. Liberal Party, 5 minutes. Motion on document distribution. I move that only the clerk of the committee be authorized to distribute documents to members of the committee, provided the documents are in both official languages and that the witnesses be advised accordingly. Working meals. I move that the clerk of the committee, at the discretion of the chair, be authorized to make the necessary arrangements to provide working meals for the committee and its subcommittees. Travel accommodation and living expenses. I move that, if requested, reasonable travel, accommodation, and living expenses be reimbursed to witnesses, not exceeding 2 representatives per organization, and that in exceptional circumstances, payment for more representatives be made at the discretion of the chair. Access to in-camera meetings. I move that, unless otherwise ordered, each committee member be allowed to be accompanied by 1 staff member at in-camera meetings, and that 1 additional person from each House officer's office be allowed to be present. Transcripts of in-camera meetings. I move that 1 copy of the transcript of each in-camera meeting be kept in the committee clerk's office for consultation by members of the committee or by their staff, and that the analysts assigned to the committee also have access to the in-camera transcripts. Notices of motion. I move that at 48 hours notice, interpreted as 2 nights, be required for any substantive motion to be moved in committee, unless the substantive motion relates directly to business then under consideration, provided that A, the notice be filed with the clerk of the committee no later than 4 p.m. from Monday to Friday, B, the motion be distributed to members and the offices of the whips of each recognized party in both official languages by the clerk on the same day the said notice was transmitted, if it was received no later than the deadline hour. C, notices received after the deadline hour or on non-business days be deemed to have been received during the next business day, and that when the committee is holding meetings outside the parliamentary precinct, no substantive motions may be moved. Motion regarding orders of reference from the House respecting bills. I move that in relation to orders of reference from the House respecting bills, A, the clerk of the committee shall, upon the committee receiving such an order of reference, right to each member who is not a member of a caucus represented on the committee to invite those members to file with the clerk of the committee in both official languages and any amendments to the bill, which is the subject of the said order, which they would suggest that the committee consider. B, suggested amendments filed pursuant to paragraph A, at least 48 hours prior to the start of clause-by-clause consideration of the bill to which the amendments relate, shall be deemed to be proposed during said consideration, providing that the committee may, by motion, vary this deadline in respect of a given bill. And C, during the clause-by-clause consideration of a bill, the chair shall allow a member who filed suggested amendments pursuant to paragraph A an opportunity to make brief representations in support of them. Motion regarding technical tests for witnesses. I move that the clerk inform each witness who is to appear before the committee that the House Administration Support Team must conduct technical tests to check the connectivity and the equipment used to ensure the best possible sound quality, and that the chair advise the committee at the start of each meeting of any witness who did not perform the required technical tests. Linguistic review. I move that all documents submitted for committee business that do not come from a federal department, members' offices, or that have not been translated by the Translation Bureau be sent for prior linguistic review by the Translation Bureau before being distributed to the members. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. We've now heard the routine motions read in their entirety. Do we have agreement that these motions be passed? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Well, if it's all going to be this easy. Thank you, everybody. Yes, Madame Michaud. I don't have translation, by the way. I don't have.
You don't have your. Vous avez pas votre écouteur, peut-être?
I don't have an earpiece. No.
There's one on your old desk.
Ah. Okay.
Pendant que vous vous installez, merci, Monsieur le Président.
While you are putting the piece on, I would like to table the following motion for the reason that brought us here together. And I'm going to read it. That the committee in the that given the increase in gun violence and the numerous deadly shootings, that the standing committee had 2 meetings so that the Minister of Public Security and the representative of the RCMP may testify for 3 hours each, and that this might be done before the 3rd of May.
C'est March.
March.
Not May.
Yes.
So could we get that's not what.
Est-ce qu'on pourrait avoir une copie? Ce n'est pas ça qui a été distribué à la Chambre.
C'est en effet une nouvelle motion, ça a été envoyé.
Yes, that was a new motion.
Sorry, it's a new motion.
C'est une motion qui vient préciser
It's a motion that is specifying certain details of the motion that was brought before the committee here.
The clerk advises me that there is no English translation of the motion that was just expressed, and therefore he cannot distribute it to members, which seems like a technical problem. So if the motion can't be distributed, I don't know how we can deal with it.
I want to just read it in English.
J'ai la version anglaise, je peux la lire.
I have the English version. I could read it in English.
The clerk will endeavor to, as fast as possible, to distribute the motion in English. Meanwhile, we can debate the motion. If members have opinions they want to express.
We can't debate the motion, with all due respect, Chair, without having it in front of us.
Well, how long is it going to take to get the English translation?
It's available. I just need to send it to everyone else, and everyone else can take time to read it.
Ms. Dencho.
My understanding is it's not part of the routine motions that you have to have a physical copy, that Ms. Michaud is within her rights to bring it forward and for us to debate it. So I think we should discuss the motion that she brought forward.
The clerk says that we can't debate the motion unless that it is in front of members, and it's not in front of members. Is that correct, clerk?
I don't, yeah. Wasn't like that all the other committees I was on.
Lots of motions from the floor.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what, we can't table drop motion?
Mr. Chair?
I've got 5 people talking and me at the same time. Let's try to work our way through this small technical glitch. The translation will be available in a matter of moments, but the committee, if it wishes, can choose to begin to debate the motion. Is it the will of the committee to begin to debate the motion? Mr. McKinnon, you got the floor.
Bells are ringing that we need unanimous consent to proceed.
Sir, I can't hear you.
The bells are ringing. We need unanimous consent to proceed.
Oh, the bells are ringing again. Further complication. Yep.
May I suggest we can carry on for like 10 minutes and then adjourn? Or
We can't continue the meeting while the bells are ringing unless we have unanimous consent to do so. Do we have unanimous consent to continue the meeting? We do not. Then I think we have 2 choices. We can go back to the House and vote and come back here and resume the committee meeting, or we can satisfy ourselves that the important business of the committee has been discharged already, and we can end the meeting until the next meeting at the call of the chair. Shall I suggest that we adjourn? I've got hands up. Madame Michaud.
Seulement pour clarifier.
Yes, I just want to clarify, Mr. Chairman, if we adjourn today's meeting and we haven't discussed the motion that brought us here today, then what happens? Is the meeting postponed? Will there be another one this week? How do you decide that?
The subsequent meeting would be at the call of the chair, and that would be a decision that we would make depending on the will of the committee dealing with this particular issue now. Yes, Madame Dancho.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Dancho. Mr. Chair.
We can come back and finish the 2 hours, and I think that would be wise, given we're in the middle of a motion. It's the reason we're here. So I would suggest that we go vote and return, and that's my suggestion, that we finish our 2 hours that we've been allotted.
Is it the case, clerk, that given all of these changes and all of these procedures that we have the room for the full 2 hours? So that is a possibility? Okay. Well, what is the will of the committee? It sounds to me like we would adjourn the meeting now. We would go back to the House, suspend. We would go back to the House to vote, and we would come back and continue with the business of the committee. Ms. Damoff.
Chair, we've amended a motion from the House, which I find unusual because the House has directed us to do something. The minister will come next Thursday to appear before the committee. The motion before the House asked him to appear. So he is prepared to come on Thursday at the call of the chair is fine. And I would move that we adjourn today and hear from the minister on Thursday.
The suggestion is made that because we have agreement from the minister to appear in front of the committee next Thursday, that we adjourn the meeting now, and the meeting will begin again next Thursday. Others who want to speak? Yes, sir.
Sorry, Chair, was that for me?
Yep, that was for you.
Yeah, just a clarification. I noticed that our meeting schedule, if this were to be a regular week next week, we would meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Is there a possibility for the chair to call us on Tuesday to have a meeting and then to honor the minister's meeting on Thursday as well?
Possible. Sorry, one at a time. I had other. Yeah, Madame Michaud.
Merci.
Thank you. Would that mean that we'd have the RCMP on Tuesday and next Thursday the minister, and then we would be on the Christmas break after that? Is that what I'm to understand?
I have no information about the availability of the RCMP. I do have a note that says that Minister Mendicino will not be able to appear until Thursday. We know that. And that he will be available for an hour. Departmental officials are available for the full 3 hours. I have no information on the availability on very short notice to be guaranteed the participation of the RCMP. We can find out, and I think the answer to the question of availability might help inform the rationale to have a meeting on Tuesday or when it can be scheduled. I just don't have that information. Go ahead.
Just have a point of clarification. My understanding is, yes, the motion was passed in the House, but formally the bloc needs to bring forward a motion here that needs to be passed. So I just want to confirm that what Ms. Damoff is saying is correct, just to make sure that we don't need to pass a motion here to get the minister on Thursday, because I thought that we did.
Mr. Chair, I do believe we have a motion to adjourn on the floor.
Well, we do, but it would be good to clarify this, and I think that the clerk can help clarify this. The issue raised is that there has already been a motion passed in the House that includes the participation at further meetings of the minister and the RCMP and others. So that already is a motion that has been passed by the House. We have some further information now about the availability of the minister for next Thursday for an hour. I have no information on the availability of the RCMP, but I'll find out. And once I do find out, then it will be easier to determine the length of the next meeting that we can agree now will be called for next Thursday. Whether there's a requirement to call a meeting in the interim or not will depend on the availability of others. Madame Michaud?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Seule chose.
The only thing, it's great that the minister is available on next Thursday, but in the motion it is written that it is for a 3-hour period, and we were told that the minister would be available for only 1 hour. Can we ensure that we have him for 3 hours, or to plan 2 more hours where he would come testify before the committee?
My understanding is that due to the restrictions with interpreters, we only have the room for 2 hours on Thursday. And next week, because all the committees are meeting, we only have one day when this committee can meet next week, which is Thursday. So there is a commitment in the motion passed in the House for 3 hours, which would mean 2 hours on Thursday, and then the committee would still be owed an hour at a future date for the minister to come to fulfill the requirements of the House.
So my understanding is that it would be cumulative and not necessarily all at the same time. We have to make a decision now to get back to the House to vote. We also have an adjournment motion on the table. Can we agree that we will adjourn this meeting? I think as chair, I have enough sense of the will of the committee to call the next meeting next week, knowing that the minister will be available. We'll find out in the meantime the availability of others who were mentioned in the House motion. And we have a motion to adjourn this meeting on the floor. Let me put that motion to a vote. To adjourn. All those in favor? All those opposed? Okay. Is that okay? So thank you. We got through the important business for today. The chair will call the next meeting. We have a motion that was passed by the House that will inform the next move. Thank you very much, everybody. The meeting is adjourned.